Once you make your second pinch pot, I would check to make sure that it kind of aligns with your first pinch pot. It would be helpful to keep them relatively similar in size, but if one piece is way bigger or smaller than the other, keep that in mind for when you're sizing them. Now, if I were to put these two together, I can see some gaps. I can actually see all the way through to the table. So I need to even out this pinch pot that I just made because this one is already pretty flat, which should line up on the new pinch pot pretty well. If they're not near the same size at all, you're going to have your top pinch pot kind of fit into the bottom one. So remember, while we try to make our egg, it's important to keep it somewhat similar so that the two ends line up pretty well. Now I've cut a little bit of the extra clay off of the edge of this pinch pot, but again, when I try to match them up, they don't match perfectly. So that means I need to kind of figure out what to do to change the size and shape. When you are thinning out your pinch pots to thin the walls, keep in mind, if you pinch this too much, it's going to become paper thin and it will be too flimsy and it will not hold the other pinch pot. So you want to have even relative thickness, kind of similar. If it helps, just put them side by side. If they look equally thick, you're good to go. If they don't, you either need to pinch the thicker pinch pot a little bit more, or with your smaller pinch pot, you can kind of shape and like pull things out a little bit, but careful because you could rip it right open. Now, for some of your projects, you have mentioned that you want to have two halves of your egg. That is perfectly fine. Just keep in mind that the top of this, an egg doesn't crack smooth, okay? It's not going to be totally flat. So if you want to create your own little cracks in the egg and those jagged edges, you can do that with all sorts of carving tools, or you could cut those little bits out with a knife. But for the sake of closing my egg, I'm going to show you now how to score and slip that together. If you have little micro cracks in your clay, similar to this pinch pot here, it's got some cracks along the edges. There are a couple ways you can fix that. So you can either smooth it out with your finger by kind of pulling that clay, or you can use a fettling knife or any type of scoring tool. Even a pencil would work. There are going to be some pencils in your supply containers. You could do little micro, meaning tiny, little score marks. See how I'm putting little cuts in there. You don't have to go very deep with those cuts. And then you can use a tool to smooth those out. That will kind of help join together those gaps. And see, now they are closed up. Or after you make those little marks, you can use your finger again, or any wooden tool that is in your container, especially with a smooth edge, is going to be really good for smoothing out micro cracks, smoothing out any details you have, and things like that, to give it that nice finished look where it's more polished and solid. So now I got rid of the micro cracks that were right there, and that was a pretty easy fix. So now I'm going to attach both halves of my egg to make that pinch pot. So what I need to do is put score marks on both halves of my pinch pot. And then when I am cutting these, a fettling knife will work, which looks similar to a butter knife. Be careful with this. It is still a knife, even though it's not very sharp on the end. If you're not careful, you could still hurt yourself. You can use a fettling knife. You can use a pencil. Some of your tool containers even have scoring tools, which are like a little metal spiky tool. And if you don't have one of those in your container, anything will work. Some containers have pens, these work as well. So I'm going to use a fettling knife, and I also need my bowl of slip. Remember, slip is like pottery glue. It's kind of like mud. Usually slip is a wetter consistency than this, so it is a little bit more like yogurt or mud. But for right now, for the demonstration, this will be fine. So I need to put those little score marks into my pinch pot. The fettling knife is super thin, so if you want something to make a little bit bigger marks, a pencil works well, a sharpened pencil, or the pen. So you would just make these marks by kind of cutting into your clay. If some clay falls into your pinch pot, just pull it out. And then you'll make these marks all the way around, and then you'll also need to add slip. So you'll make your first cross marks. You might need to go a little bit deeper if you're cutting really shallow and you can barely see your score marks like right here. Your clay is not going to attach. So you need to make your cuts much deeper, really cut into that clay. It's okay if it looks chunky. It's all going to help hold together. So they don't have to be perfect, but they do need to be deep enough. So I'm gonna make these cuts all the way around. And then I'm gonna do just a couple more, really rough up that surface. Think back to that Velcro example I gave you. If you were to put two fabric-y ends of Velcro together or two of the spiky ends, Velcro won't stick together. So clay is very similar. You need to have a rough edge and then you combine it with the slip, which is like putting the fabric to the spiky side of Velcro. So if little pieces of clay fall into your pinch pot, like I said, just pull them out, pick them out, and then go around your other pinch pot. I'm just using a pen here. Like I said, many tools will work. In your containers, you might even find a toothbrush. That's more for detail work. I don't recommend using them for scoring because I don't feel like they do a very good job. Sometimes though, people like to use them to kind of smooth things out. That is perfectly acceptable. So I'm gonna use my pen, just do a couple more score marks. You may have little bits of clay fall off, that's totally fine. Now I need to add my slip because that is the glue that holds everything together. So you can get slip a few ways. You can either use the edge of your finger or you can use a tool to help scoop it out. Now you don't need so much slip that it is dripping all over the place. That is way too much. I only recommend putting slip on one of your two pieces because if it's too much slip, it's going to ooze out and your piece could slide around. So we just need little bits. If you notice, I'm not putting a whole lot on this first pinch pot. I'm only gonna put it on this one that's currently in my hand. And then you might lose some of your score marks when you do this. That's fine, just go back over them again. And that slip really can sink into the score marks on the other piece. So I'm gonna put this around. I'm just gonna use my finger because it's kind of dry and it's not sticking very well with the tool. And then, like I said, I'm just gonna go back into my score marks a little bit more so that way it has something to hold on to. Now, when I go to attach my top pinch pot to my bottom pinch pot, I can't just stick it on there and expect it to work. It will fall off and it's not secured well. So when you attach these, since it's going to be a closed container and you can't reach in to smooth out the inside, you need to very carefully, so gently but firmly, push the two halves together without crushing your egg and really make sure they're secure. And then what I like to do to really ensure that my two halves are connected and become a whole is I go back into it, score around the edge a little bit more. These score marks will need to be a little bit bigger. I'm gonna take this fettling knife, go from the top to the bottom and really make almost like stitches on the two pieces to help stitch them together. I'm gonna do this all the way around the pinch pot. And then, like I showed you earlier, to smooth out micro cracks, you can use any tool or even your finger. This will ensure that your two halves are very secure together. So I've made all the score marks I need, and then I'm just gonna use the smooth edge of this tool and kind of pull that clay and really fuse the two halves together. Now you may have a little bit of pilling or like balling up with the clay, that's fine. You can clean it up later. But for now, we need to make sure that these two halves get connected really well. So now I have attached the top half with the bottom half. They're pretty secure, they are connected. I'm kind of tugging at it and they feel pretty stuck together. So if you look closely, you'll see that there are a lot of jagged parts and uneven edges. So again, you can just go back in with your finger and start to smooth out those little inconsistencies in the clay. There's lots of ways to smooth out your clay. Since it is hollow in the middle, be careful that you aren't pushing on it too hard because you can crack open your egg. If you were not intending to do that, you'll have to start over, or you'll have to score and slip together the pieces that have come apart. Now, this is a closed object that is empty in the middle. There's air trapped inside. We need to get that air out. So instead of breaking open the egg and undoing all of the work that we just did, there's a quick, easy fix. It's called venting, which basically creates a vent for your clay piece, which just means putting a hole in it so that air can escape. So I'm just going to go into it with a fettling knife. I'm just gonna put a really thin little cut into it. It's not major, it's not super obvious. And then That will allow the air to escape. And since it's on the side of my egg, it doesn't really enhance my design anyway, so having it there doesn't really matter. Last thing I want to do is carve my name somewhere on the bottom edge. And on the opposite side is where I will create my hatching, or whatever my idea was for my project. So now I've got my name in there. Always carve your name with a pen or a pencil or a wooden tool that has a more prominent edge. Something like this would work because it's pointy, it's sharp. If you try to carve your name with a fettling knife, you're not going to be able to see it very well. So for example, I'll show you what that would look like if I were to carve on this chunk of clay. If I try to do my name, it's so thin that the second you start touching your clay and like moving it around, you're going to start like kind of filling in your own name. And then once that's fired, it's permanent and I can't read your name. So please make sure you carve your name with something with a prominent edge, either the pen or a sharpened pencil or these little wooden rods that are in your tool container. So now I have my name on it, that's permanent, that's good to go. And then I have my little vent. You could also poke a little hole into it instead if you want, but that little hole has to be deep enough to go through to the empty part where that air is trapped. I'm just gonna close that up because I could tell that that wasn't gonna poke deep enough into the egg. And now I am ready to move on.